The diplomatic chamber aboard the massive Zephyrian flagship hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced technology. Ambassador Veltar adjusted his ceremonial robes, the iridescent fabric catching the artificial light as he prepared for what he considered a routine negotiation with yet another primitive species. The humans had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel, making them barely worthy of acknowledgement in galactic society. Around the circular table sat representatives from 12 different species, each more advanced than the last. The crystalline hierarchs with their translucent bodies that shimmered like living diamonds. The void walkers whose dark forms seemed to absorb light itself. The machine collective, their cybernetic representatives clicking and whirring with mechanical precision. And at the far end, looking remarkably ordinary, sat the human delegation. Veltar's species, the Zephyrians, had dominated galactic politics for over 3,000 cycles. Their blue-scaled skin and towering 7-foot frames commanded respect throughout known space. More importantly, their military might was legendary. The infamous Zephyrian war claws had conquered 17 star systems in the last century alone, earning them fear and admiration across the galaxy. The human ambassador, a middle-aged woman named Sarah Chen, sat quietly reviewing her datapad. Beside her were 2 advisors and what appeared to be a security detail. Veltar barely glanced at them, dismissing humans as another weak species that would soon bow to superior galactic powers. "Let us begin," announced the session mediator. "A floating sphere of pure energy from the ethereal collective. The matter before us today concerns the human request for full membership in the Galactic Council, along with their proposed territorial claims in Sector 7749. Veltar rose smoothly, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. "Honored colleagues, while we welcome new species to our galactic community, we must be realistic about their capabilities and contributions." His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Humanity has existed in space for barely 2 decades. They possess no significant military strength, no advanced technology beyond what they've borrowed or stolen, and no notable achievements in warfare. The crystalline hierarch chimed in with a sound like wind through glass chimes. "The Zephyrian speaks truth. Humans show promise in commerce and basic sciences, but they lack the strength necessary for council membership." A representative from the machine collective, its voice a harmonious blend of electronic tones, added, "Analysis confirms. Human military capabilities rank in the bottom percentile of spacefaring civilizations. Their weapons are chemical-based projectiles. Their armor is basic metal alloys. Their tactics are primitive." Veltar's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he continued his assessment. "Indeed, their so-called elite warriors are laughably weak by galactic standards. They call them Marines, I believe." He paused for effect, noting the slight stiffening of the humans at their table. "These Marines are supposedly their finest fighters, yet they require breathing apparatus in most environments, lack natural armor, and possess no enhanced strength or speed. They cannot even see in multiple light spectrums without artificial aids." The chamber filled with various sounds of agreement from the assembled species, clicking from the insectoids, humming from the energy beings, and mechanical whirring from the collective. "Furthermore," Veltar continued, warming to his subject, "human psychological profiles indicate they are prone to fear, panic, and emotional decision-making under stress. Their Marines supposedly train for a mere few months, unlike our war claws who undergo decades of conditioning and genetic enhancement. They break under torture, they flee from superior odds, and they lack the killer instinct necessary for true warfare." Ambassador Chen finally looked up from her datapad, her expression carefully neutral. "Ambassador Veltar, while I appreciate your assessment of human capabilities, perhaps we should focus on the specific territorial and trade agreements under discussion today." Veltar waved a dismissive hand, his scaled fingers gleaming. The territorial claims are irrelevant, Ambassador Chen. Humans simply lack the strength to hold territory against any serious challenge. Your Marines might intimidate other humans with their primitive tactics, but against real warriors, against war claws who can tear through steel with their bare hands, against void walkers who can phase through matter, against crystalline shock troops who can withstand direct energy blasts. He let out a sound that might have been laughter. Your Marines would flee at the first sight of actual combat. The void walker representative's form rippled with amusement. Perhaps we should establish a demonstration zone. Let the humans send their finest warriors against our training units. The galaxy would benefit from seeing the truth of their capabilities. An excellent suggestion, agreed the insectoid delegate, mandibles clicking rapidly. Our hive warriors could use the practice. Human Marines would provide adequate target practice for our freshly molted soldiers. Ambassador Chen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. I think there may be some misunderstandings about human military doctrine and capabilities. Perhaps misunderstandings, Veltar interrupted, his voice rising with mocking laughter. Ambassador, we have access to your military records. Your Marines carry weapons that fire metal projectiles using chemical explosions. They wear armor that wouldn't stop a child's training blade on my homeworld. They require vehicles for transportation because they cannot even fly. He gestured broadly to the assembled delegates. Every species in this chamber could defeat your entire Marine Corps using only our basic training units. The Machine Collective representative processed for a moment before speaking. Probability calculations confirm a single Zephyrian Warclaw unit would achieve 94.7% casualty rates against human Marine formations. Margin of error negligible. You see? Veltar spread his arms wide, addressing the chamber. These humans seek to join our council, to claim territory in contested space, to be treated as equals. But they bring nothing to offer except weakness. Their Marines, their finest warriors, are no more threatening than the prey animals we hunt for sport on our homeworlds. Several delegates made sounds of agreement. The ethereal mediator pulsed with mild interest, but offered no comment. Ambassador Chen finally stood, her small frame dwarfed by the towering aliens around her. Ambassador Veltar, representatives of the Council, I understand that humans are new to galactic society. We are still learning your customs and proving ourselves worthy of membership. However, I must respectfully disagree with the characterization of our military capabilities. Veltar's lips curled in what passed for a smile among his species. Disagree all you wish, Ambassador. Facts remain facts. Your Marines are untested against real opposition, equipped with primitive weapons, and lack the genetic advantages necessary for serious combat. They are warriors in name only. In fact, he continued, his voice dripping with condescension, I would wager that there isn't a single human Marine in existence who could survive 10 seconds in actual combat against even our least experienced Warclaw recruit. Their reputation as ruthless or elite is nothing more than propaganda designed to intimidate other primitive humans. The chamber fell silent, except for the ambient hum of the ship's systems. Ambassador Chen looked around the table, noting the expressions of superiority and dismissal on the alien faces. Even the more neutral delegates seemed convinced by Veltar's arguments. I see, she said quietly. So the Council's position is that humans lack the military strength necessary for membership, and that our Marines specifically are ineffective against true galactic military forces. Precisely, Veltar confirmed. Perhaps in a few centuries, after significant genetic modification and technological advancement, humans might be worthy of consideration for associate membership. Until then, you would be better served accepting protectorate status under a more established species. He gestured to himself with obvious pride. The crystalline hierarch chimed agreement. The Zephyrians make a generous offer. Protectorate status would provide humans with necessary protection while they develop. Ambassador Chen nodded slowly, appearing to consider the offer. I appreciate the Council's perspective on this matter. Before we proceed with any agreements, however, I should probably introduce all members of our delegation properly. She gestured to her left. Dr. Marcus Webb, our Chief Science Advisor. A tall, thin man with graying hair nodded politely. Commander Lisa Rodriguez, our Technology Specialist. A woman in a crisp uniform acknowledged the introduction with military precision. Then she turned to her right, where a man had been sitting quietly throughout the entire exchange. He was of average height for a human, perhaps in his 30s, with short-cropped dark hair and calm brown eyes. Unlike the others, he wore no formal diplomatic attire, instead dressed in simple, dark clothing. And this, Ambassador Chen continued with the slightest hint of a smile, is Gunnery Sergeant James Mitchell, United States Marine Corps. The silence in the chamber stretched for several heartbeats. Veltar's confident expression flickered slightly as he processed the words. A Marine? The Voidwalker representative rippled with what might have been surprise. You brought one of your warriors to a diplomatic meeting? Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell stood slowly, his movement economical and precise. When he spoke, his voice was calm, steady, and carried an undertone that made several of the more sensitive species unconsciously shift away from him. Ma'am, he said, addressing Ambassador Chen while never taking his eyes off Veltar. I've been listening to the ambassador here talk about Marines for the better part of an hour. With your permission, I'd like to address some of his concerns about our capabilities. Veltar's scales seemed to darken slightly, though whether from embarrassment or anger was unclear. There is nothing to address, human. Your presence here merely confirms what we already know about your primitive military structure. Mitchell took a single step forward, and somehow that small movement changed the entire atmosphere of the room. The casual confidence he had displayed while sitting transformed into something else entirely. Something that made the predator species in the room suddenly remember what it felt like to be prey. Sir, Mitchell said, his voice still perfectly respectful but carrying an edge that seemed to cut through the diplomatic niceties, I'd be happy to demonstrate exactly what a Marine can do. Anytime you're ready. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees as every being present suddenly realized that the primitive human warrior they had been mocking was standing right there, listening to every word, and appeared remarkably unimpressed by their superior genetic enhancements, advanced technology, and galactic military reputations. Veltar's throat worked soundlessly for a moment before he managed to speak. This is highly irregular. Diplomatic meetings are not the place for military posturing. No, sir, Mitchell agreed, never blinking. But then again, diplomatic meetings aren't usually the place for mocking another species' warriors, while one of those warriors is sitting 3 feet away from you either. The ethereal mediator pulsed with sudden interest, its energy form brightening considerably. Perhaps we should adjourn for a recess to allow all parties to reconsider their positions. But nobody moved. The attention of every being in the chamber was focused on the small drama unfolding between the towering Zephyrian ambassador and the quiet human who had somehow made himself the most dangerous presence in a room full of galactic predators. Ambassador Chen cleared her throat gently. Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell, while I appreciate your willingness to defend the Corps, perhaps we should let Ambassador Veltar finish his assessment of human military capabilities before we respond. Yes, ma'am, Mitchell replied, settling back into a relaxed stance but somehow managing to appear even more threatening in the process. I'm very interested in hearing what else the ambassador has to say about Marines. Veltar's confidence had evaporated entirely, replaced by the growing realization that he had spent the last hour insulting the very warrior standing before him. a warrior who showed no signs of the fear, panic, or emotional instability that Veltar had claimed characterized all human fighters. The chamber waited in tense silence as Ambassador Veltar struggled to regain his composure, unaware that his casual dismissal of human Marines was about to become the worst diplomatic miscalculation of his career. The silence stretched until Ambassador Veltar finally found his voice, though it lacked the commanding tone he had used moments before. That is to say, the presence of military personnel at diplomatic functions is unusual, but not unprecedented. He straightened his robes, trying to recover his authoritative demeanor. However, the fundamental facts remain unchanged. Human military capabilities are simply insufficient for council membership. Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell tilted his head slightly, studying the alien ambassador with the kind of calm attention usually reserved for particularly interesting specimens. "Sir, you mentioned that our weapons are primitive chemical projectiles. You're absolutely right." He reached slowly into his jacket, causing several delegates to tense, but withdrew only a small device that looked like a metallic pen. "This is a standard-issue ballpoint pen. Chemical ink, spring-loaded mechanism, plastic and metal construction, primitive by your standards, I'm sure." He held it up so everyone could see it clearly. "Now, from where I'm sitting, I can kill Ambassador Veltar with this pen in 4 different ways before his enhanced reflexes could react. I could probably take out 3 more delegates before anyone else in the room could even stand up." His tone remained conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. "Would you like me to demonstrate on one of your war claws first, so you can see how primitive weapons work?" The chamber erupted in shocked sounds from various species. Veltar's scales shifted to a pale blue that indicated fear among his kind. You dare threaten a diplomatic envoy?" "No, sir," Mitchell replied calmly. "You asked me to demonstrate Marine capabilities. I'm simply explaining what those capabilities are. There's a difference between a threat and a tactical assessment." He pocketed the pen with the same careful movement. "A threat would be if I told you what I was going to do. A tactical assessment is just explaining what I could do if circumstances required it." The machine collective representative whirred and clicked rapidly before speaking. "Probability calculations indicate error. Cannot compute effective methodology for eliminating target with specified implement." "That's because your computers are thinking like machines," Mitchell explained patiently. "They're calculating physics and trajectories and structural weak points. A Marine thinks about leverage, timing, and psychological impact. We don't fight machines, sir. We fight living beings who bleed, who panic, who make mistakes when they're scared." Dr. Webb, the human science advisor, leaned forward slightly. "If I may add some context, Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell has served in 17 combat theaters across human space. He's been shot, stabbed, blown up, crashed, poisoned, and subjected to every form of warfare humans have devised. He's also trained extensively in what we call asymmetric warfare, fighting opponents who are larger, stronger, and better equipped." The Voidwalker representative's form shimmered with agitation. "Impossible. No baseline organic could survive such extensive combat exposure without genetic enhancement." Mitchell shrugged. "Depends on how you define survival, sir. I've got enough scar tissue to armor a small vehicle, and my medical file reads like a trauma textbook. But I'm still here, and most of the things that tried to kill me aren't." He paused thoughtfully. "The trick isn't being stronger or faster. The trick is being meaner and more stubborn than whatever's trying to kill you." Veltar had been quietly consulting his own datapad, his expression growing more troubled by the moment. "Your military records indicate that humans have never faced opponents with our level of capabilities. How can you claim effectiveness against superior forces when you have no experience fighting them?" "Well, sir," Mitchell said, settling into what was clearly a familiar topic, Humans have been fighting superior forces for our entire recorded history. Every war we've ever won has been against somebody bigger, stronger, more numerous, or better equipped than we were. He began counting on his fingers. We've fought each other with sticks while the other side had bronze weapons. We fought with bronze while they had iron. We fought with muskets while they had artillery. We fought with rifles while they had machine guns. Commander Rodriguez nodded agreement. Human military doctrine has always assumed we'll be outgunned and outnumbered. Our entire tactical philosophy is built around defeating superior opponents through superior planning, training, and sheer bloody-minded determination. The crystalline hierarch chimed with what sounded like skepticism. Yet you claim these tactics would be effective against species with natural advantages you cannot match? Mitchell's expression never changed, but something in his eyes grew harder. Sir, with respect, every enemy we've ever faced had natural advantages we couldn't match. They were bigger, stronger, more numerous, had better weapons, superior positioning, or home field advantage. That's just Tuesday for a Marine. He stood up again, this time moving with the fluid precision of someone who had practiced violence until it became an art form. You mentioned that your war claws can tear through steel with their bare hands. That's impressive, sir, but humans stopped fighting hand-to-hand as a primary tactic about 1,000 years ago. We figured out that you don't need to be stronger than your enemy if you can be smarter. The insectoid delegate's mandibles clicked rapidly. Explain this smarter approach to warfare. Gladly, Mitchell said. For example, Ambassador Veltar mentioned that Zephyrian war claws undergo decades of genetic enhancement and conditioning. That's a significant investment in time and resources. Very impressive warriors, I'm sure. He paused for effect. But here's the thing about elite troops. They take a long time to replace. We've learned that the best way to fight superior individual warriors is to make sure they never get to use their individual superiority. Veltar's scales had shifted to a mottled pattern indicating confusion and growing concern. What do you mean? Well, sir, Mitchell continued conversationally, let's say I need to neutralize a squad of your enhanced war claws. I'm not going to challenge them to single combat. That would be stupid. Instead, I'm going to wait until they're sleeping. Then I'm going to use a chemical agent to make sure they never wake up. Or I'm going to sabotage their transport so it crashes. Or I'm going to poison their food supply. Or I'm going to call in an artillery strike on their position from 10 miles away. The chamber had gone completely silent except for the ambient ship's hum. The thing about being a Marine, Mitchell explained, is that we don't fight fair. We cheat. We lie. We use every dirty trick, psychological manipulation, and tactical advantage we can think of. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is completing the mission and going home alive. Ambassador Chen spoke up. Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell, perhaps you could explain the concept of escalation dominance to our colleagues. Yes, ma'am? Mitchell turned back to address the assembled delegates. Escalation dominance is the idea that no matter how much force you bring to a fight, we can bring more. You send 1 ship, we send 10. You send 100 warriors, we send 1,000 Marines with air support, artillery, and orbital bombardment capabilities. The machine collective representative processed this for several seconds. Query: what if opponents possess superior numbers and resources? Mitchell's smile was not pleasant. Then we get creative. Human history is full of examples where smaller forces defeated larger ones through superior tactics, better intelligence, or just plain being more vicious than the other guy was prepared for. He paused. We have a saying, if you're not cheating, you're not trying hard enough. Dr. Webb added, it's also worth noting that humans have developed these tactics while fighting other humans, a species that thinks exactly like we do. We've spent thousands of years learning to outthink opponents who can predict our strategies, anticipate our moves, and counter our psychological warfare. Fighting aliens with different thought patterns might actually be easier in some ways. Veltar's confidence had completely crumbled. But But surely there are limits to these tactics, rules of engagement, codes of honor? Oh, absolutely, Mitchell agreed. We have very strict rules about how we conduct warfare. We don't target civilians, we treat prisoners humanely, we try to minimize collateral damage. His expression hardened again. But those rules apply to how we treat people who surrender or who aren't fighting us. People who are actively trying to kill Marines, well, sir, we have different rules for them. The Voidwalker representative made a sound like static electricity. What kind of rules? Simple ones, Mitchell replied. Rule 1, win. Rule 2, survive. Rule 3, make sure the other guy doesn't get to try again. He looked around the chamber at the assembled delegates. Everything else is just details. Commander Rodriguez pulled up a holographic display. Perhaps some concrete examples would be helpful. This is a tactical analysis of the Proxima Centauri incident, where a single company of Marines held off a superior force for 6 days until reinforcements arrived. The hologram showed a 3-dimensional battlefield with unit positions and movements marked in different colors. The Marines were outnumbered 12-1, had no air support, limited supplies, and were facing an enemy with superior individual combat capabilities. They won through a combination of superior positioning, psychological warfare, improvised weapons, and what our after-action reports diplomatically termed innovative tactical thinking. Veltar stared at the display, his expression growing more horrified by the moment. They used the enemy's own dead as improvised fortifications? Psychological impact, Mitchell explained matter-of-factly. Nothing breaks enemy morale like having to assault a position defended by the corpses of their friends. Plus, it provided excellent cover from incoming fire. The ethereal mediator pulsed with what might have been fascination or revulsion. Your species weaponizes death itself? Sir, Mitchell said, humans weaponize everything. We've used music as torture, mathematics as codes, biology as warfare, and physics as weapons of mass destruction. We turn tools into weapons, weapons into tools, and enemies into allies when it suits our purposes. Adaptability isn't just a human trait. It's our primary weapon system. Ambassador Chen stood up, smoothly taking control of the conversation again. I think this demonstration has been quite educational for everyone involved. Perhaps now would be a good time to reconsider the territorial and membership agreements? Veltar looked around the chamber, noting the changed expressions on the other delegates' faces. The casual dismissal had been replaced by thoughtful concern and, in some cases, barely concealed fear. Perhaps we should take a recess to review the terms of the proposed agreements, he managed. Of course, Ambassador Chen agreed pleasantly. Take all the time you need. Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell will be here when you're ready to continue. As the delegates began to file out of the chamber for their recess, Veltar found himself unable to look directly at the quiet human Marine who had just systematically dismantled everything he thought he knew about human military capabilities. The hunt had begun, and the Zephyrian was starting to realize he might not be the predator in this room after all. The recess lasted 3 hours, during which frantic communications buzzed between the various species' home worlds. When the delegates finally returned to the chamber, the atmosphere had completely changed. Where before there had been casual dismissal and condescending superiority, now there was a careful wariness that spoke to hastily revised intelligence assessments and emergency strategy sessions. Ambassador Veltar entered last, his usually pristine robes slightly disheveled, and his scales showing the mottled pattern that indicated high stress among his species. He had clearly spent the break researching human military history in considerably more detail than his previous casual overview. The ethereal mediator resumed its position at the head of the table, its energy form pulsing with subdued authority. Shall we reconvene? I believe there are matters that require further discussion. Veltar cleared his throat. the sound carrying none of his earlier confidence. "Before we continue with the territorial agreements, I believe there may have been some misunderstandings regarding human military capabilities." He glanced nervously at Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell, who had remained in his seat throughout the break, apparently unbothered by the alien deliberations. "During our recess," Veltar continued, "I took the opportunity to review more detailed records of human military engagements. The data suggests that our initial assessment may have been incomplete." The Machine Collective representative's mechanical voice carried an unusual note of uncertainty. "Revised calculations indicate significantly higher probability of human combat effectiveness than initially computed. Previous data samples were insufficient for accurate analysis." Ambassador Chen smiled politely. "I appreciate the Council's willingness to reconsider their position. Perhaps Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell could provide some additional context to help clarify any remaining questions." Mitchell stood again, but this time the delegates were watching him with the kind of attention usually reserved for unexploded ordnance. "Happy to help, ma'am." He turned to address the assembled beings. "I understand there might be some confusion about how human military doctrine actually works in practice. Maybe I can clear that up." The crystalline hierarch chimed softly, a sound that carried nervous overtones. "We would be interested in understanding how humans achieve victory against numerically and technologically superior forces." "Well, sir," Mitchell began, "it starts with understanding what warfare actually is. Most species seem to think of combat as a contest between individual warriors or even individual armies. Humans learned a long time ago that wars aren't won by the strongest fighters. They're won by the civilization that can sustain the highest level of organized violence for the longest period of time." He began to pace slowly, his movements controlled and precise. "Take the Proxima Centauri conflict that Commander Rodriguez showed you earlier. That wasn't really a battle between a Marine company and an alien force. That was a battle between two entire civilizations, with those Marines serving as the tip of a very long spear." Dr. Webb activated another holographic display. "This shows the full logistical chain supporting that single company. Supply ships, intelligence networks, orbital assets, manufacturing capacity, research and development programs, training facilities, and approximately 2 million support personnel spread across dozens of star systems." The display was staggering in its scope, showing a web of interconnected systems stretching across light years of space. "You see," Mitchell continued, "those Marines weren't fighting alone. They were backed by the entire industrial and military capacity of human civilization. Every bullet they fired was manufactured by automated systems. Every tactical decision was informed by intelligence gathered by spy networks. Every piece of equipment they used was designed by teams of engineers who had studied thousands of years of human warfare." Veltar stared at the display, his scales shifting to the pale blue of fear again. The logistics required for such coordination, the resources, the planning, are considerable, Ambassador Chen agreed. "But that's the point. Human military doctrine assumes that any significant conflict will require the full mobilization of our civilization's resources. We don't plan for fair fights, we plan for total war." The Void Walker representative's form rippled with agitation. "You are describing a level of militarization that seems excessive for a peaceful species." Mitchell's expression grew somber. "Sir, humans aren't a peaceful species. We're a species that learned to be peaceful because the alternative was extinction. We spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing each other before we figured out how to cooperate. That cooperation doesn't make us less dangerous. It makes us exponentially more dangerous." Commander Rodriguez pulled up a new set of displays showing human population and industrial statistics. Current human population stands at approximately 43 billion across 172 worlds. Total industrial output includes ship construction, weapons manufacturing, and resource extraction across 8 star systems. Military reserves include approximately 2 billion trained personnel who can be activated within 30 days. The silence in the chamber was deafening. 2 billion? The insectoid delegate managed, mandibles clicking weakly. That's just the active reserves, Mitchell clarified. Every human adult receives basic military training as part of our education system. In a total war scenario, we could field approximately 15 billion combatants within 6 months. They wouldn't all be Marines, of course, but they'd all know how to shoot, move, and communicate. Dr. Webb added, "It's also worth noting that human industrial capacity is specifically designed to be convertible to military production. Every civilian manufacturing facility can be retooled for weapons production within weeks. Every civilian vessel can be converted to military use. Every civilian scientist can contribute to weapons research." The machine collective representative processed this information with increasing alarm, mechanical voices overlapping as multiple units struggled to compute the implications. Total war capacity of this magnitude, unprecedented, cannot model effective countermeasures. Because there aren't any, Mitchell said simply. That's the point. Human military doctrine isn't designed to win fair fights. It's designed to make fights so unfair that the enemy surrenders rather than face complete annihilation. Veltar's voice was barely a whisper. What about the rules of warfare? Surely there are limits. Absolutely, Ambassador Chen confirmed. Humans maintain very strict rules of engagement, and we honor all galactic conventions regarding the treatment of prisoners, protection of civilians, and prohibited weapons. However, her voice carried a subtle edge, those rules only apply when the opposing force also follows them. Mitchell nodded grimly. If an enemy follows the rules, we follow the rules. If they don't, he shrugged. Well, humans wrote most of those rules in the first place because we knew exactly what happens when there are no rules. The ethereal mediator pulsed with deep concern. You are describing the capacity for significant destruction. Yes, sir, Mitchell agreed. But more importantly, we're describing the capacity to prevent destruction. Every potential enemy who understands what they would be facing in a war with humanity is an enemy who will choose diplomacy instead. Peace through strength isn't just a slogan for us. It's a survival strategy. Dr. Webb brought up a final display, this one showing comparative military expenditures across known galactic civilizations. Human military spending as a percentage of total economic output ranks 4th among Council species. However, due to our industrial efficiency and population density, our absolute military capacity ranks significantly higher. How much higher? The crystalline hierarch asked, though the harmonic overtones suggested it might not want to know the answer. Currently, Commander Rodriguez replied matter-of-factly, human military production capacity exceeds the combined output of the next 12 species on the Council. Our logistical networks could support simultaneous operations in over 50 star systems, and our research and development programs are advancing at a rate that suggests technological parity with even the most advanced Council races within the next decade. The chamber fell into another long silence as the assembled delegates absorbed this information. Finally, Veltar spoke, his voice hollow with shock. When you requested Council membership, this was all intended as a negotiation from a position of strength. No, sir, Ambassador Chen replied gently. This was intended as a negotiation from a position of honesty. We're not threatening anyone. We're simply explaining why we believe humanity deserves to be treated as an equal partner rather than a primitive protectorate. Mitchell sat back down, his posture relaxed, but his eyes still alert. The thing is, we don't want to fight. War is expensive, it's wasteful, and it gets good people killed. We'd much rather trade with you, learn from you, and work together to solve mutual problems. But we're not going to accept a subordinate position because someone thinks we're too weak to demand respect." The Voidwalker representative made a sound like electronic feedback. "The territorial claims in Sector 7749? You could simply take that territory if you chose." "Yes, sir. We probably could," Commander Rodriguez confirmed. "But we'd prefer to have the Council's blessing and established legal framework. Peaceful expansion with recognized boundaries is much more stable than territorial conquest." Veltar looked around the chamber at his fellow delegates, noting the shell-shocked expressions on various alien faces. The casual dismissal of human capabilities had turned into a horrifying realization of just how badly they had miscalculated. "I believe," he said slowly, "that the Council may need to completely reconsider our approach to human membership applications." The Machine Collective representative's voice carried a note of mechanical precision. "Revised recommendation. Grant full Council membership with territorial recognition as requested. Alternative scenarios carry unacceptable risk parameters." One by one, the other delegates voiced their agreement. The insectoids, the crystallines, the energy beings, even the proud void walkers, all suddenly saw the wisdom in treating humanity as a full partner rather than a potential subordinate. As the formal voting proceeded, Veltar found himself watching Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell with a mixture of respect and lingering fear. The quiet Marine had never raised his voice, never made an explicit threat, never shown any sign of aggression. He had simply explained, with calm professionalism, exactly what humanity was capable of achieving when pushed too far. The vote was unanimous. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Veltar approached the human delegation. His earlier arrogance had been completely replaced by genuine curiosity and, perhaps, a grudging respect. "Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell," he said formally, "I owe you an apology. My characterization of human Marines was both inaccurate and insulting." Mitchell stood and extended his hand in the human gesture of peace. "No offense taken, sir. You were working with incomplete information. Happens to the best of us." Veltar clasped the offered hand, noting the controlled strength in the human's grip. Perhaps you could tell me more about Marine training methods? For academic purposes, you understand." Mitchell's smile was genuine this time, lacking any trace of the predatory edge from earlier. "I'd be happy to, sir. Over dinner, maybe? I hear Zephyrian cuisine is supposed to be outstanding." As the former adversaries made plans for a peaceful meal, Ambassador Chen reflected on how quickly galactic politics could change when people finally understood what they were really dealing with. Humanity had just been welcomed into the galactic community not as supplicants seeking protection, but as equals demanding respect. And in the end, that respect had been earned not through threats or violence, but through the quiet professionalism of a single Marine who had simply explained what Marines do when the galaxy gets too dangerous for diplomacy alone.